S10, S20. Two sets of 3 phones and a galaxy of differences between them. Let's start with the overall look of the lineup. The S10 series featured the S10e, S10 and S10 Plus, in addition to the S10 5G which launched later down the line. For the S20 series you've got the vanilla S20, the S20 Plus and the S20 Ultra. So the E device is going away and instead you've got a more full-featured S20 that forms the bedrock of that range. The only thing you're missing in the small S20 versus the Plus is the time of flight depth sensor around the back and millimeter wave 5G support. Compare that to the S10e with its much smaller battery and lack of telephoto zoom camera. And as such, the entire S20 range is much more expensive across the board than the S10 was just 12 months ago. Your base model S20 runs just shy of $1,000 in the US, with a $200 bump up to the S20 Plus and a $1,400 price tag for the cheaper of the two S20 Ultra variants. That's pretty steep considering the kinds of deals you regularly see for S10 series phones. The reason for higher price tags this year isn't just because they include 5G as standard now. There are also upgrades aplenty across the board. There's a generational jump in processors, Snapdragon 855 to 865, or Exynos 9820 to 990 in some countries. 12GB of RAM is now the standard, up from 8, and it goes as high as 16GB in the S20 Ultra. Battery capacities get a significant bump too, with the S20 now starting at a base of 4000 mAh, going up to 5000 in the Ultra. Those are significant on-paper increases for the S20 series, but then these new phones have far more power-hungry features. As well as 5G, take for instance the new 120Hz displays. It's an optional feature of course, but if you want the smoothest experience on your S20, you are definitely going to be making use of those larger battery capacities. The new phones also support faster wired charging, up to 45 watts compared to the S10's 18 watts, although like the Galaxy Note 10, the in-box charger only pushes 25 watts of juice, so you need to fork out for Samsung's 45 watt brick to hit those maximum charging speeds. In terms of physical size, as you'd expect, the S20 lines up broadly with the S10 and vice versa for the S10 Plus and S20 Plus. The S20 Ultra though is a real monster. Look at it here next to the S10 Plus and it's clear this device is in a class of its own. It's big, it's heavy, it's powerful, and as we already mentioned, it's also pretty expensive. Back to display though, because the most obvious difference between the front faces of the S20 and S10 is the placement of the front-facing hole-punch camera. The cutout is now smaller and centrally located like the Galaxy Note 10, and the Plus model also loses its secondary depth-sensing camera around the front, which, if we're honest, never really made that much difference anyway. The biggest difference for me though, going from the S10 to S20 is going to be the camera setup. If you couldn't tell by these decidedly chunky camera bulges, Samsung has really gone to town and done a lot of work to improve the camera setup from the S10 to the S20. Last year's model used a variation of the various 12 megapixel setup Samsung's been using in flagship phones for years, with 1.4 micron pixels. The new S20 and S20 Plus camera stays at 12 megapixels, but with much larger pixels on the sensor at 1.8 microns, meaning of course better low-light shots. The ultra-wide stays at 12 megapixels but with some improvements there too, and finally the 64 megapixel 3x optical zoom is a big step up from the older 12 megapixel 2x offering from the S10. In other words, think better photos across the board and better low-light shots and zoom capabilities in particular. That's as well as 8K video recording if you want to get really fancy. The S20 Ultra though blows all of that out of the water, with its new 108 megapixel sensor that does even better in low light, and the 10x hybrid zoom camera that goes all the way up to 100 times in digital zoom, hence the slightly gaudy branding around the back there. Obviously that setup is a huge leap beyond anything Samsung had going on in 2019. So if you're on the fence as to whether to upgrade from an S10 to an S20, or if you're deciding between this year's phones or last year's, basically the difference comes down to camera, display and 5G. Those are the major areas of improvement in this release cycle. Faster screen, better photos, especially zoom photos and low light, and that faster 5G connectivity. The overall software experience is extremely similar to last year's phones, with a handful of new tricks like Google Duo baked into the camera app, and the new single take mode that takes a bunch of data from the cameras as you move and automatically takes the best shots for you. But as for the overall look and feel, the One UI 2.1 software that you see on an S20 is virtually identical to the One UI 2.0 software that's rolling out to S10s right now. Let us know in the comments whether you think the S20 is worth picking up with the S10, and subscribe so you don't miss our full review and other coverage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.